Hilchos Shabbos, Perek Shlishi. Mutter lahaskel b'melochem erev Shabbos, afal pi shi nigmeres meila b'Shabbos. Shalineser aleinu lasis melocha leba'atzma shel yom. Aval kshetiyasa ha-melocha mi'atzma b'Shabbos, mutter lonu lihonis b'ma shenasa b'Shabbos meilov. So the Rambam is saying that there's an issur to do melocha on Shabbos, but the fact that you did something on erev Shabbos, and what you're doing is continuing on Shabbos, that's not a problem. The problem is to do the malacha. Knows what would be the svara that there is a problem? That sof kol sof, since what's happening on Shabbos is coming through your asiyah, so it could be just like you're not allowed to tell a goy to tell him do a malacha for you, and Alter Rebbe is masber that it's al derech v'shlichus, and knows the goy, even though you told him erev Shabbos, and the goy is doing it on Shabbos, but it's keilu like it's an extension of your doing it. So Alder is over here. You did something on erev Shabbos, and through that, something is happening on Shabbos. Could be. So that's the chiddush. The chiddush is no. That by the goy is kilo. You're doing it today because the goy is your shliach. So kilo, he's doing it today. But you did it on erev Shabbos. The fact that as a titzov, what you did on erev Shabbos, things are happening on Shabbos is of no relevance. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. Now. Could be that, the same shaila would be if a person is doing a malacha. I'm not saying la halacha, but I'm saying if someone is doing a malacha in a place, in a time zone where it's not Shabbos. And lepel, as a result of what he's doing, there's something happening in a place where the time zone is Shabbos. So he's l'chura doing a malacha on Erev Shabbos. By him, it's Erev Shabbos. Lepel, the malacha is nasa in a place where it's Shabbos. So what's the din then? There's a whole deal about it. But sending like a fax, sending a fax when they used to send faxes. So you would send a fax from a place where it's Erev Shabbos to a place where it's already Shabbos. So that was the question. That's a question. So l'chura, Alder is over here. You're doing a malacha on Erev Shabbos, and it's happening on Shabbos. So that is saying there's no problem. Mine says the Rambam Shiur tuis, at the end of the halacha, ksheta'asa malacha mi'atzma b'Shabbos, mutter lanu lihonis mashanasis b'Shabbos me'elov. Lihonis, who's talking about lihonis? We're talking about whether you're allowed to do the ma'aseh yisur. So I saw that there's a girsa in the new Rambam that giving out from Shilat. There's a new girsa. There's a girsa that says as a. First of all, like kilo, it says mutter twice. Ksheta'asa hamalacha me'atzma b'Shabbos mutter, and mutter lanu lihonis mashanasis b'Shabbos me'elov. Kilo two dinim. One din is that the Etzem HaMaisa is also, you're not doing anything wrong. And secondly, you're also allowed to be nana mimashanasa b'Shabbos me'elov. And later on, we'll see Taka, the Rambam is going to say both halachas. Side that it's mutter, and side that you're allowed to be nana. Okay. Ketzad. Poiskin mayim legina, erev Shabbos im chashecha. You open like you direct the water going into the gina. V'himis malaz v'heilechas kol hayom kuli. So the whole day, water is coming into the gina and irrigating the gina, which is a ma'aseh yisur, but you did it on Erev Shabbos. Umanichen mugmer tachas hakelim, v'heim is gamrin v'hilchen kol haShabbos kula. So the mugmer, the psamim, is going into the kelim, into the kelim. So and that's a yisur of meilit. So it's lachura. We're talking about a yisur derabanan. So what's the chiddush? The chiddush is that if you did a malacha on Erev Shabbos, you did it on Erev Shabbos. So even though it's continuing on Shabbos, which is a Isur D'Rabbanan, that's mutter. Then umanichen kiler al gabi ha'ayin, is pulonis al gabi hamaka, umisrapen v'hilchen kol Shabbos kula. So what's the chiddush over here? What's the Isur that the ayin is being misrapen? L'chur again, it's a Isur of refuah, it's a Isur D'Rabbanan to make refuah on Shabbos. So there would be kilups a mokim lachshev that you're doing a ma'aser refuah on Erev Shabbos. And this refuah on Erev Shabbos is continuing through Shabbos. So that's the chiddush. The chiddush is that this refuah, which is continuing on Shabbos, is not awesome. It's not included in the Isur refuah on Shabbos. Then v'sheirin diei v'samonim im chashecha v'heim nishin v'hilchen kol haShabbos kulu. So that's a Isur deraisa, Isur tziveya. And v'neisen tzemel liyera. This is the diei v'samonim. Is in other words, you're making dye, you're making ink. So you have the whatever it is that's making the ink, and that's soaking in the liquid, and that's making the ink, which is a Isur D'Oraisa. V'neisen tzemel liyera v'unen shel pishton letanur Vehein mishtanin v'hilchin kol Shabbos kula again. So this tzemer is changing, which repasses the Isser of Misak and Mana, that's the Isser D'Oraisa. Upersin mitzudis l'chayo le'efes u'ledog im chashecha, spread out nest. Vehein nitzoiden v'hilchin vehein hilchin v'nitzoiden vehein nitzoiden v'hilchin kol Shabbos kula. So this net, these traps that you spread out, so they are functioning all of Shabbos. And alderas of a ten and bekeres beisabad or biguli hagas. So in other words, in a wine press or in an oil press, so you put on it very heavy wood in order for it to continue that it should be oozing out. The oil and the wine should be oozing out. So you put it on erev Shabbos im chashecha before night v'amashkin zov ve'helchin kol Shabbos kula. And then umadlikin is haner is hamadurim mi'bo'erev. You light a candle. V'hidilekas kol Shabbos kula. So here again, the shaila is in Mishnah. There's an issue b'nigei shvisas kelim. So there's certain things over here that's a shaila whether there's shvisas kelim. So Bishame holds that there's a din shvisas kelim, and Bishul holds there's no din shvisas kelim. But the Rambam is not talking about the din of shvisas kelim. The Rambam is talking about the din of ma'aseh malacha, when a person does a malacha on erev Shabbos, and that malacha is going to continue on Shabbos. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. That's the chiddush of this halacha. Menichin k'deir al derez menichin k'deir al gabi eish e baser betanur e gabi gecholim vehein mizbashlim v'hilchin kol Shabbos kula. And then v'oichlon eis b'Shabbos. That's what we said before, that there was two halachas. First halacha that it's mutter, the actual thing that is happening is mutter, and then there's another din mutter lo nilihanas mashnasa b'Shabbos meilov. That's the end of halacha aleph. Taldero's over here. He's telling you that you're allowed to do this, and then he says, "V'oichlin oisim b'Shabbos." You're allowed to eat it on Shabbos. However, v'yesh b'davar zed dvarim shein asurim, shema yichat gzeira shema yichat b'gecholim b'Shabbos. So although mitzad the ma'aser yisur to do a malacha, to do something on erev Shabbos, which is causing something to happen on Shabbos, is not a problem. But there's another problem. There's a problem that there's certain things which were concerned. And that problem will be even if you didn't do it, if someone else did it, a guy did it, and lepel it's in your house, and there's such a matzv, so there's a chash of Shem Yechat b'Gecholim b'Shabbos. Halacha Dalet Ketzad Tavshil sheli Bishul kol tzorchei or v'chamen sheli huch mikol tzorchon oi Tavshil shebishul kol tzorchei aber v'chol zman shemitztam meku yofole. So in other words, you're still interested in it either being cooked completely or to be cooked in an ephah of mitztam v'yafale. The more, even though it's already fully cooked, but the more it's cooked, it's even better. So these things, such ein mashnesi al gabi eish b'Shabbos, you're not allowed to leave them on top of a fire. Aval pi shehunach m'beid yem, so there's no problem. L'chur of ma'aser malacha, but there's another issue. Gzeira shemi yechate b'gecholim kedei lahashlim bishulei kedei letzomke. So to leave a pot over a fire in a matzev where it's leinas bashal kol tzorchei or mitztamik v'yofle, you're not allowed to because of the chash Hashem yichati b'gro lefichoch. So since the problem is only Shem yichata, is in gorefeish a shekisa a shakira be'efer a b'neiris apishna daka. Now we're talking about a stove which is called a kira. Now a kira means a stove that has a place for two pots on top. So if you took out the fire, you took out the wood, the fire was on, or the coals, or you covered the fire of the kira with either ashes or ne'eres apishtim, the fallings of a flax, hadaka, oi, she'im of mu'ag gecholim, the coals are already extinguished. Sharei hein kimechuses be'efer, it's like as if they're covered be'efer, even though there's a little fire in the coals, but they're covered over with the outside of the coals. Oy, she'sikua b'kasha b'gava. Originally, you didn't use wood to heat the fire. You used straw, a gava, a stubble, a bigloli behemadaka. Shari ein sham gecholim bears. There was never really burning coals in this oven. So memela, so harezeh mutar l'shisala. In such a situation, when you're either garafeish or you were kiseish, or melachatchila, it was imamu hagecholim, or you chatchila used kashe gavave gloli be'madaka. So in such a case, hareze mutalishis. Why? Sharehi siach daitim is adafshul. Now, l'churi you would say because there's nothing to stir, there's nothing there to stir. But we'll soon see that in a tanner, even in such a situation, you also choshesh that you'll stir. So in other words, there is something to stir. Not like there's nothing to stir. But in such a by Akira, we assume that he was isiach daitim the atafshul. In other words, he knows that there's not really much left. He covered it. It's already burned out. So Memele, he was already mesiach das. Whatever will be with the tafshul will be, and he's not going to go ahead and start stirring in these gecholim. Then gezel shemi yechat beish, he's going to start stirring the fire. But medvar mamurim that we say we're not worried in a case where you have these situations is bekira shahav lamut. When we're dealing with a kira stove, where the heat is not so strong. Avalat tanner, if we're dealing with an oven, which you cook. A stove is something you cook on top. An oven is something you cook inside. And it was built. The bottom was wide and the top was narrow, so it was very, very hot. Is afal pi shegora fa'esh? You already took away you cleaned out the fire. A kisa be'efer, a shisikua bekashi begavava. So all these cases, what we said before, there's no concern. But by a tanner, ein mashin esei v'lei al gabov. I'm sorry, ein mashin b'techi in the tanner. V'lei al gabov on top of the tanner, and over here there's an extra chumrah. V'lei semchali tafshel. And you also don't put next to it a tafshel, even if it's not on top or it's not inside. Shali bishul kol tzorchei, eshe bishul kol tzorchei mistameh v'yafaleh. This is in such a case, by a tanner, these tanoim won't help. By a kira, these tanoim will help as long as the fire was already dealt with, so in a way that you shouldn't stir from it. But a tanner, these things of the fire won't help. Hail v'hav licham b'yeser is eini mesiach daite, so he's always thinking about it because things are going to happen over here. It's very hot. Therefore, v'choishen shemi yechata bezu eish hamuta afal pishu eish kaf. Kash even though it's already covered, it's very, very little because it was straw. What kind of gecholim are already left with straw? But nevertheless, we're worried that since we're dealing with something that's very hot, there's a concern. Shemi yechata. Good. That explains by kash and gavava or covered. What could be the problem? If you were garuf, you took away the fire, so how could there be a problem? So the answer is even when you shovel things away and you take out the fire, you're not really taking out every little thing. You're taking out most of everything. You can't take away the whole thing. There must be left a little bit sparks and things that are holding the sparks. And since we're dealing with a tanner, which is havlicham, so there's still a concern shemi yechata. So nochamo, b'negei akira, the din is that if it's leinas bashul kol tzorchei or mistamik v'yofalei, so if you covered it with either afer or it's gecholim that it's already extinguished gecholim, or it was garaf, it was grufa ktuma, so all these cases is mutter. That's by a tanner. I'm sorry, by a kira. By a tanner, these things don't help. These things don't help. Even though it's grufa and ktuma, it doesn't help. Why? Because it's very hot and something left over and you're not mesiach das, and there's always a concern of shemi yechata. Now this din, we're talking about something which is either leinas bashul kol tzarchei or it's mistamik v'yofaleh. Masha'inkin, if it's mizbashal kol tzarchei, or if it was mistamik, it was mizbashal with kol tzarchei, and it's mistamik not v'yafalei. So then, even a tani, you're allowed to be masha. The issue over here, we're talking about either was late mizbashal kol tzarchei, or was mizbashal kol tzarchei and mistamik v'yafalei. Masha'inkin, it was mizbashal kol tzarchei, and it's not mistamik v'yafalei. So then, there was never an issue, even by a tani. That's posh. Halacha zayin hakupach havle rav mehevel akira. Umuet mehevel ataner. A kupach is also a stove, but it's not a stove that has space for two pots. It's only for one pot. So therefore, the heat is very intense because there's only very little bit space, and the fire is right under the pot. Lefichach imi sikur begefes e be'etzim is then hareu ketaner. So then the kupach has a din of a tanner, and therefore has all the din of a tanner. Ve'ein mashn b'teichei v'lei al gabo v'lei seimcha lei tafshel shlei bishul kol tzorchei emetzamek v'yofel. These same dinner by a tanner that you can't under these any circumstances to put there a tafshel shlei bishul kol tzorchei emetzamek v'yofel applies to a kupach as well. Aber ve'im afalpi emetzamek v'yofel afalpi shegora fekisa beifer. So then is areo kekira shuhuska bekash v'gavava umashno umuter lismech lekira mibaeref. This is the issur of smicha. This doesn't apply to akira. V'aval pisha ein grufuk tuma. So before, when you were speaking about a tanner, even if it is grufuk tuma, you're now going to be semich. But akira fakert, even if it's not grufuk tuma, the issur of being semich to akira doesn't apply. Ezu kira ve'ezu kupach. Kira became shvisas shtei kderes, and kupach is became shvisas kderachas. Now, all we're talking about till now is a tafshel shalein is bashel kol tzorchei, or it's nizbashel kol tzorchei and mitztamik v'yofikle. What about if it's a tafshel halacha ches, tafshel chai, shali bishul klal, shebishul kol tzorchei u'mitztamik v'rale? So then is muter l'shoisei al gabi ho'esh bein bekira v'kupach bein betaner. So there's two. The kula is both ways. Sai if it's nizbashel kol tzorchei and mitztamik v'rale, which is very understandable, and al derev zeh b'negei tafshel chai, because since it's a tafshel chai, so he doesn't really expect to be able to be using it very soon, and therefore he's mesiach das, and therefore there's no concern of shema yechata. So even though so there's no din. This whole din of tafshel chai, there's no hagbolus. That tafshel chai shel bishul klal shel bishul kol tzorch and saming v'rale mutal l'sheisi al gabi oish without gruful ktuma bein bekira v'kupach bein betan. V'chein tafshel shel bishul v'lei bishul kol tzorch by bishul kol tzorch umtztamik v'yofale. So if you have like the ones we were talking about earlier. But in Hishlich Luteche Ever Chai Samuko Bein Hashmoshes, it was right before Bein Hashmoshes, you put in a raw piece of meat. So now you have over there a raw piece of meat that's completely not cooked. Is Nasa Akil Kitaf Shulchai, Umutul Ashesi Al Gabi Aloeish, Aval Pishalei Gora Velekisa. Mipnei Shekvar Yisiach Daitim Imena, Ve'enid Bo Lachtis B'Gecholov. Since there's a raw piece of meat over there, and that needs a lot of cooking. So we assume that he was Messiah Das, and there's no kshash of Shema Yechata B'Gechol. Now, Kol Tafshel She'aser Lashoisei, a Tafshel which is Aser Lashoisei, we spoke before, a Tafshel She'aser Lashoisei, is an over V'Sho Eisei, if Lepel you were Sheya, is Aser La'ochle Ad Mitzvah Shabbos, V'Yamten B'Chdei Sheyasu. So you did an Isser, the Isser of Shia, so you're not allowed to be Nana on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to be Nana even Matzah Shabbos until B'chdei Sheyasu. That's if you did it b'mezit, if you were Masha b'mezit. Aber v'im shokhe, you were Masha b'shegig. Is im tavshel sheli bishul kol tzarchihu. So sof kol sof, there was like cooking done on Shabbos b'Isser. It wasn't the Isser of Maisa Bishul, but it was the Isser of Shia. But through the Isser of Shia, which you did b'shegig, it became cooked. So then is Asr ad Mitzvah Shabbos. So it's a tavshel shel bishul kol tzarchi, it's Asr ad Mitzvah Shabbos. But the im tavshel shel bishul kol tzarchi, if be'emes it was cooked already, and it's mitztamik v'yafale. So although it was mitztamik, you forgot it. You forgot it there on Shabbos. And lepel you chaptzach, and 3 hours into Shabbos. So lepel was cooked better. It was mitztamik v'yafale. But lepel, since it was already nizbashel kol tzarchi before that, so therefore it's not considered that you're nana from Ma'aser Shabbos, from Ma'aser Shabbos, and therefore, and you did it b'shegig, so mutter lo'ochle miyad b'Shabbos. Is nachamal. If you did it b'mezid, if you were able b'mezid, so then you're not allowed to use it until Mitzvah Shabbos, and you have to wait until b'chdei sheyasu. If you did a b'shegig, it depends. If it was nisbashul kol tzorchei and it's misamik v'yofale, so you're allowed to use it even on Shabbos. There's no problem. You're allowed to use it on Shabbos. But if it's lin nisbashul kol tzorchei, so you're allowed to use it mitzvah Shabbos. Now, in the case of shegig, where it's lin nisbashul kol tzorchei, where you have to wait till mitzvah Shabbos, the Rambam doesn't say that you have to wait until mitzvah Shabbos and also b'chdei shiyasu, like by Amazit. He just says you have to wait until Mitzvah Shabbos. Masha'inki, the Rosh brings that you do have to wait until B'chdei Shiyasu. That's how it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that you have to be machmer, that if you forgot something, which is Leinas Mashal Kol Tzorchei, and you were Mashed Al Gabi Ha'esh, so in Mele there was like Nena from Meiser Shabbos, so you're now let it use it until Mitzvah Shabbos, and you have to wait B'chdei Shiyasu. Halacha Yud. Kol shemuter lashesi al gabi ha'esh, aber kshenetun esi b'Shabbos also lachzir elim kemet. There's like a lot of issues here, but again, the wording of this Rambam was first he gives a general wording, and then, but we'll read the long Rabbi over here. Nachamo. Kol shemuter lashesi al gabi ha'esh, aber kshenetun esi b'Shabbos also lachzir elim kemet. The general rule is that even though it's muter lashesi, but on the other end it's also lachziri. However, but sometimes you are allowed to. Ve'im machzirin le'elam, ela al gabe kira grufa imechusa, a bekira v'kupach shehusku b'kashu b'gavava. So, in other words, l'chura, what's coming out here is that a kira, which is grufa imechusa shehusku b'kashu b'gavava, there could be a din of chazor as well. Masha'in came b'nigei tanur, or a kira, a tanner, no matter what, or a kira which doesn't have, it's not grufa iktuma, it's not mechusa. So in such a case, you also can't have chazara. That's what it says in the Rambam. Now, when could you be masha al gabi tanner or al gabi kira shein grufa iktuma? So if it's mistamik and not yofale, or if it's mistamik and not yofale, because you can't say we're talking about in a case. I mean, a case where the basa was basa chai, because it's brought down in the Magid Mishnah that that's l'chura davar hapashut. That if it was leinas bashal kol tzorchei, l'mashal akira grufa imechusa, where you're allowed to leave a tafshel which leinas bashal kol tzorchei. But in such a case, you're not allowed to be mazir because then you're cooking. Now, since it was leinas bashal kol tzorchei, so being mazir a davar which is leinas bashal kol tzorchei is asur b'cholif. So on that we can't be talking about. The only issue of chazara could only be if something was already nizbashal kol tzorchei. Now, even if it was nizbashal kol tzorchei, and it's, let's say, mitztamik v'yofalei, so if it's grufa, so then you're allowed to. If it's grufa iktuma by a tana, you're allowed to. Masha'in came, if it's not grufa iktuma by a tana, the mashal, if it was, you were allowed to be mashet, because let's say originally you had a tafshel chai. You were allowed to be mashed. There was no issur of shia. But now, even though there's no issur of shia, and it's already cooked, it's completely cooked. So now the question is, if there's a heter of chazara. So on that he's saying, the heter of chazara is only by a kira, which is grufa uktuma. Not by a kira she'ena grufa uktuma, and also not by a tana, regardless. If it's grufa uktuma or not. Because a tana, whether it's grufa uktuma, it doesn't change. Then he says, "Vahu, this din that you're allowed to be magzer a k'deira on top of a kira, which is gruful ktuma, and as we said when we're talking about that it was already in this bashal kol tzorchei, that must be is vahu shalehi niach hagdeira al gabi karka. Aval mishinicha al gabi karka. So you already put it down on the ground, so then it's not considered chazara because it's like a new union of bishul. Is so you're not allowed to take a kira, which normally you'd be allowed to be mavzeh because we're talking about, a kedera, which you're allowed to be mavzeh because we're talking about a kira grufu ktuma, and the shia was better. But from Desvin, once you put it down on the ground, it's a mavzeh nesa. Afilu al gabe kira grufe mechusa. A mavzeh letanur v'le lekupach shehusko begefesi be'etzim aval pi shegoraf ekisa mepnei shehavlon cham b'yesa. So you can never be mazur to a tanner or to a kupach, which was husak begefes. Be'etzim because that then it has a din of a tan. The chol she'em machzidin olav ein same chalei b'Shabbos. To be kitzur, we're learning the dinim of Shia, the Shia b'negei akira that's gruful ktuma. You could be masha a tafshel shel nizbashel kol tzorchei, or it's mitztamik v'yafalei. Masha inkein b'negei a tanner, you could never be masha in such a situation. The only time you could be masha on a tanner is only if it's mitztamik v'ralei or it's basar chai. B'negei chazara, you could only be mazir to a kira which is gruful ktuma, and also if it's nizbashel kol tzorchei. The Rambam doesn't say that, but the Magen Mishnah adds that. Masha'ink in akira, you could never be mazir, even if you're allowed to be masha in akira. The mashal was mistamik ralei, or originally it had a basar chai. You could never be mazir to akira, and you can't be mazir. You're not allowed to be mazir to a tanner. You can't never be mazir to a tanner, and you cannot be mazir to akira if it's not gruful ktuma. Okay. Halacha Yudalef. Osir lahachnis magrefa legdeil b'Shabbos, v'hi alo eish lehetzi mimena b'Shabbos. To put in a fork into the pot to take something out. Why? Mipnei shemeges ba. Because by doing that he's being meges. V'zeh mitzorchei Bishul v'nimtze k'mavashel b'Shabbos. And this iser, the Rambam says, is only alo eish. Whereas alo eish, there's an iser to put something in because there's a concern of you being meges. So mashenkin shalei alo eish, you could put in the fork. The pashas because there's no kshash megas. That's what the Lechem Mishnah says. In other words, the Rambam's learning that the iser megas is only while the pot is on the fire. Mashenkin, if you take the pot off the fire, so then there's no iser megas. That's what it says there. Mashenkin, the Alter Rebbe brings that just halacha that when it's leinis bashal kol tzarchei, so you're not allowed to even do this with the fork and take something out of the pot, even when it's not on the fire. And you're not allowed to be megas. You're not allowed to be megas. There's a isur megas if it's leinis bashal kol tzarchei, because megas mitzarchei abishul. If it's on the fire, so if it was leinis bashal kol tzarchei, you can't be megas even if it's off the fire, and you can't even put in the fork to take it out. Masha'in came, if it was nizbashal kol tzarchei, so on the fire you're not allowed to, but off the fire you're allowed to. If the fire you're allowed to. That's if it was nizbashal kol tzarchei. Yeah. Umuta laharzin mikira lekira. You're allowed to take a kedera from one stove to another. Afilu mikira shahav lemut lekira shahav lemeruba. Avulei mikira letmina, which is the tmina is to insulate something. And v'lei metmina lekira. So there's a din. We're going to learn that there's a isur of insulating of atmana. So that you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to take something that's on the pot, a pot that's on the fire and insulate it, or something that's insulated and put it on the fire. That you're not allowed to. Yeah. Halacha Yud Beis. Now we learned earlier that if you have a pot which has a raw piece of meat, even one piece of meat, or frat, everything is raw food, so then you're allowed to put it. There's no problem of shia. But he says, "Le'imala adam kedeira sisies." The turmusim types of beans, echavish shel mayim, v'yitein l'techa taner erev Shabbos im chashecha v'yasha esa. Why? They're all raw. You just put it erev Shabbos because she'ele v'chol ki'etze b'em aval pi sheli bishul koliker is ketavshel sheli bishul kol tzarchein b'pnei she'enon tzrichem bishul harbe and v'daiti aleim la'achlan la'alter lefichach aser la'sheisen b'taner. Because it's something which is going to be ready very soon. It's not like a raw piece of meat or something. That there's a isur shia even though it's raw. Tanur shenosim l'techi basim b'dyem v'sho eisi b'Shabbos. So there was basar in the tanur, and now it's already Shabbos. This is already, till now we were talking about pots. A pot that's on the fire. Now we're talking about there's a basar in a tanur. Tanur shenosim l'techi basim b'dyem v'sho eisi b'Shabbos is im b'sar gdihu ukiyetze bei, which is softer meat, is mutter. Why? Shem yichate b'gecholim idach yischarech habasar. The meat will get burnt. She'eni tzorech l'chmimas eish bilvad. You don't need the fire itself. You only need the warmth of the fire in order to cook this gdi, and therefore. so you're not going to go ahead and be machate b'gecholim in order to raise the fire. Of the impsar ezu, impsar sheru. So in other words, if it's the b'sar of a eiz or a sher, an ox, is also shema yechate b'gecholim levashlim. Over here, there's a chashash yechate b'gecholim. B'imtoch piatanur betit. So the piatanur, the place where you have to go and be mechate b'gecholim, you a toch betit is mutter. Why? Because she'im bol uftech atanur ulechates is tikonas haruach v'yiskasha abosar v'yifsad v'yitzdan natanur. Memelis, you're not going to do it. No, and like it's brought down that a tanur is hot, but when you toch piatanur betit, it becomes even hotter. So then when you're going to open it, so then the ruach is going to come out. So that cool air that's going to come into the tanur is going to ruin what's going on over there. Whereas if it's open a whole time, so it's, there's a certain heat, and whatever's the cool air that's coming in is not really disturbing that level of heat. Masha'inkin, if it's hot to the extent where you would touch the piatana betit, so then when you're going to open it, it's going to ruin. It's going to the wind will come in and the meat will get ruined and it'll get cold. So maybe you're not going to do it. So there's no concern they'll do it. So again, if you have a tanner which has meat in the tanner, so it depends. If it's a psar gdi of a kid, so then since it's soft meat, so there's no concern that you're going to be mechate b'gecholim, so there's no problem of leaving it. Masha'inken, if it's the meat of a goat or of an ox, so it's a meat that takes longer to cook. It's harder meat, so therefore there is a concern of shem yechate b'gecholim. Therefore, it's usher to leave it there. However, if you cover the piatanur with tit, so since you're not going to really want to open the piatanur to be mechate b'gecholim, because through that you may ruin the meat that's in there. You'll cool off the oven because there'll be a gush of cool air, which won't be good for the meat. So then there's no concern of shem yechate b'gecholim. Then it's permitted, even if we're talking about the meat of a goat, the meat of ox. Allah Yudalud, v'chein kol davar sharuach mafsedus. It's a general rule. Engagement of shemi galei v'yechate. If there's a matzav where the wind is going to come in, it'll ruin it. So there's no chash. Mipnei zeh noisten unen shel pishton l'teich tanur, threads of pishton into the tanur, which is causing it to be finished off. Im chashecha, because shem yilo. If you're going to be megala, it is yipasedu. So therefore, you keep the tanner closed. The tanner will remain closed. You're not going to open it and be mechate b'gechol. Nosan gdi shalom l'techa tanur. So what you said before, gdi is permissible, but here we're talking about a gdi shalom is areo kipsar reis. So that's already like a goat or kipsar sher. V'asu l'sheisik because shemi yechate b'gechol. Elim kein tocha tanur. Again, you'd have to be tocha tanur in order for it to be mutter. Umutter l'shal shel keves hapesach. The tanur im chashecha, although it's an entire keves, the aval pisha eini toch, mipnei shebnei chabura zrizamein. So that by the bnei chabura they're all together and they're doing the mitzvah. So we assume that there's no chash of shem yechate b'gechol. Ain't selen basar ubasel batzel ubeitza al gabi hoish ela kadeshi yetzoilu mebeit yem v'yiruin lachila. So they're already roy lachila mebeit yem, and the nishracher came al eish b'Shabbos achi yitzelu arbe. Is mutter. Why? Mipnei shekin stomach verale. Sheim yechatech is yachrech esem shal gufa eshem. So since they're al gufa esh, so therefore we're not worried that maybe you're going to try to make the fire bigger, because faket, if you make the fire bigger, you're going to ruin it. That also explains why minichan mugmer tachas akelim im chashecha. Let's worry. There's fire over there. Maybe you're going to be mechate b'gecholim. Shim yechate b'gecholim, the chisarev hamugmer that might cause the mugmer to burn rather than to be smoke up, and via ashen akelim. Holamadata shekol davar shono esim binyan zeh eini osir mishum shu nase b'Shabbos. That's not the problem, that things are happening b'Shabbos. So l'gzeira shem yechate b'gecholim lefichach ein neisnen tzemer liyoira. You don't put tzemer into a pot. Elim kein hoisa akurim yaloish. Because there's a chash shemi yechate b'gecholim, and also even if you take it off from the fire, v'hushia pia tuach betit, you have to cover up the top with tit, Because Shemi Yog is one Mishach HaShecha. There's another concern that you might stir this mixture of the tzemer and the yaira, and Memela, that's also an Isser. So Memela, by putting tit on it, so that's going to prevent a person from doing it. Even though over here you don't have the chash of the ruach, etc., etc., but over here, once you cover the pia is tuach betit, so it's a tircha to take it off, and Memela, we're not choishish that you're going to do it. Halacha Yudches. Ein noisen sapas betanurim chashecha, v'lei charor al gabi gecholim, ela kedei sheyikrumu poneha, shehi mudbakim betanur beish. That the part of the pas, which is stuck to the tanner, which is the hot tanner, which is the hot from the fire, that should become yikru poneha. It should start creating a crust. The crust on the part which is next to, which is stuck to the wall. Now the emphasis is that just the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos says Yikru Paneh means the part that's facing the tanner. No, there's not the part that's stuck to the wall, which is a bigger chumrah, because that part becomes a crust after the part that's stuck to the wall. So, and there's also issues in Girsa over here, what exactly the Girsa, but the Girsa that we have over here is Yikru Paneh Shem Mudbakim B'Tanner Reibesh. V'im nisharu achar kein, ad sheyigmar afinyosan mutter. Shim yichate yafsadesim. So knows as long as you put it there early enough that there should start being a crust on the bottom of this bread, the part that's touching the tanner. So even though it finished off later, that's not a concern, because it was never a concern yichate b'gecholim, because by being mechatek b'gecholim at that point in time, you're going to be ruining the bread. However, you didn't have enough time. It depends. Is imbezmezed if you knew that it was asur, and it was bemezed is asur lechelman ad mitzvah Shabbos, and the yamtim b'chdei shiasu like any shia bemezed. The imbeshegig is mutale lirdes mimenu mozen shal l'shudah shel Shabbos. Over here there was a special leniency. Over there b'shegig wasn't mutter, because it was lay. If something was lay in his Bishul called tzarcha, there was no heter b'shegig, because sof kol sof you had a melecha Shabbos. But over here, since it's pas, and pas is more of a tzedek of Shabbos, so the chacham were more lenient, and therefore, if it's b'shegig, you'll be lirdis mimenu mozen shal suda shel Shabbos. Ukshureida lirade b'marde, you shouldn't use the normal keli which you use in order to take out the pas from the oven. So those tanurim, they used to stick the pas to the side of the tanner. There was a whole avodah on how to take out the bread. So b'meila, you're saying liyir de b'marda el b'sakonu kiyetzeba. Mashenkin b'zman hazeh, we don't have such tanurim. B'meila says brother on Shulchan Aruch, that's not neged this din. Now this din ukshirei de liyirad de b'marda, the Rambam is saying it b'hamshech to a person that did something wrong. In other words, he put it there, and there wasn't time to be karma panel, and now he did it b'shegig. So Memela, he's allowed to be take out the Muslim shoulder sudas, and then you say liyir de marda ela b'sakan. What happens when there was time to be karma panel, and Memela he did something absolutely mutter? Is there also a din of liyir de marda? So the Mishnah I think is medayik, but certainly there's a diak of the Rambam, that the Rambam is only saying it b'hamshach if he did it b'mezid, and if he did something wrong. But if he didn't do anything wrong, it would be mutter. That would be mutter. The Rosh brings that it's asur, There's a machlekes whether it's mutter or asur. I'm saying, but b'zman hazeh it's not negeh really, because l'peil we don't have such type of tanurim. Halacha yutes. Oisa adam madura mikol davar sheyirtza. Bein al gabi karka, bein al gabi meneira. Umadlika beid midediyim, umishtamesh lo'ira, umischam connected b'Shabbos. There's no hagbolas of what kind of fire you could make, what you want for warmth, even for light. Aber v'tzarich sheyadlik reva madura keid kashecha. Most of the pieces of wood that's on the madura should be started already be lit. Achete shall have us elam eilah keid Shabbos. You should have a proper flame, and there shouldn't be a concern that you're going to try to make this flame work. Because you're going to try to make the fire work. And you're afraid that the fire is going out, so you want that the fire should be a full fire already. Over there, we're talking about you're making a whole you're lighting a bonfire. Masha'in Kain over here, if you're only lighting one wood, is tzarich lahadlik reiv ovyei v'reiv hakefim bedyeng. Most of the circumference of the wood and the thickness of the wood should already be lit. Medvar mamurim, that there's the shoshes that you have to have, that the fire should be. In the previous case where you have a kama eitzim, you're making a whole madura, so you have to have it bereiv eitzim and should be shalhavas elam yalah. That's only b'gvulim. B'migdosh is machizin suur be'eitzim b'madura as beis hameked im chashecha. Beis hameked was the place in beis hamikdash where they had the fire. People would warm themselves in that room. Ve'ein chosheshim shem yechate b'gecholim shekenim zrizim. So there's no concern. Beis hamikdash there was no concern. Al derav zeh says hoisa madura shel kanim eshel garinim. So we're talking about reeds or garinim seeds, which with the fire holds on it very easily. Is ain't tzarich lahad lekarev. Alekivan shehiskol b'moesh kedem Shabbos mutar lishtamish ba mipnei she'esh nitlas b'hem b'meira. Ain't tzarich lachatis. It's something which is very flammable. It's very easily to catch on fire, and therefore we're not concerned that the fire is going to start going out and you're going to be mechatet to make sure the fire goes out. We'll assume that if you have a little fire started already, the fire will catch on to all of it. Lefichach. So when do we say that? That's stam when they're all separate. In Ogad HaKanim, if you took these little sticks and you tied them up together, or so you put these seeds in baskets. So now they're all together, so they're not so easily. They're not as flammable. They're not as easily lit up. Is harehen keitzim. They have a din like wood, and therefore v'tzarah shetalubem shall heves meilah kedem Shabbos. Madura shel zephis, tar, eshel gopher, sulfur, eshel revav, which is fats, eshel kira, which is wax, eshel kash, eshel gava, which is straw or stubble. Ein tzarich lahad l'keruba. Again, they catch fire very easily. Kedem Shabbos. Nipnei she'esh madlekes esom b'meira.